From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano and Jon Meoli live on a Monday in August. John, 30 games remain in the regular season for the Baltimore Orioles. We're going to talk about on today's show what we've seen from this team as of late. Some shaky play here in the second half. The offense has been hot and cold, or they were too reliant on the home run. The AL is still wide open, really putting in place where the Orioles are and putting in perspective as they head to the home stretch exactly how tight that race is in the American League. And then we're going to do a rotation reset. What does this rotation look like after the myriad injuries? But first off, John, you're wearing a shirt that you bought for $10 on the sidewalk.
Yes.
And it looks fantastic.
Thanks a lot, man. So there's been, it's a viral street. This is the street. This would be the street, not giving away, exactly where I live.
Yeah, no, that people would be lining up around the block by the time you got home.
Yeah, no, I probably not for a good reason either. So the street that we've seen on the internet with, Lamar Jackson Holiday Street.
Yes.
I bought this shirt on that street. I was not there for that reason.
Really?
There being a sidewalk sale in which my family got a fantastic bike and this
Nice.
shirt and some other fashion that are not for me. It's for the other adult in my house, my wife. I was not there for that, but I was able to walk to that easily. So I'm feeling great right now.
Good. You should. It looks great. It fits you perfectly.
Yeah. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do with shirts.
No.
That's more of a me thing than a shirt thing. But you get one that works, and if you get one that really works, you'd wear it the day after you bought it on the sidewalk without any thought to like washing it or anything.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good context to know.
Yeah, this is a visual medium and an audio medium,
Yeah.
not a
smell. There's no smell-o-vision on here. Yeah. If you're watching, by the way, you should be. If you're not watching, you should be watching live on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. You can also listen to us after the fact on any of your favorite podcast platforms. Please give us a like, a thumbs up, write us a good review. Write us a review about John's shirt. That'd be fantastic. All right, John, I tweeted this out. The question of whether the Orioles are too homer happy. And I got some responses that were, are you just noticing this now? The Orioles have been homer happy for years now, really under the Mike Elias era. I don't think it's ever been as pronounced as this. It right now is putting a bog on their offense. They right now are having these swells where they will hit 1 million homers in a game and the offense will look fantastic. And then they have another game where they have 2 or 3 hits and the offense looks like it's never been worse. In the past week, they've had a pair of 3-hit games and a pair of 2-hit games. And shockingly, they've lost all of those games. This team right now, if they're not getting homers, it feels like they're not winning games.
Yeah. So there's a column that just went up on the Banner today about kind of them sticking to what they've been doing because like even though it hasn't been very good for a couple months now, and it's fair to acknowledge that they're not in the business of changing things up. Basically, other than this past week when they faced the Astros and the Mets and had a couple games where they, like you mentioned, didn't hit at all. Like we're talking about a team that has vacillated largely between like weeks where they're like right a little above like league average offensively and like way above like. There are fewer extreme swings, I think, over like larger samples, whether it's like, 2 series together, one couple weeks together, a couple months together, than it seems like. But that's not really material when like the outcome of the days when you don't do what you're supposed to do is you lose because you don't get any hits.
Right.
The lineups these last couple of days have not been like A lineups.
You mean Emmanuel Rivera starting at first base is not an A lineup?
That's not how anyone thought this would go at any point in this season. And I think that's a testament. I think it's like a credit to them to be where they are.
Sure.
But there are a lot of people you expect to be the home run hitters in this lineup who are just not doing that. So it comes down to like sequencing. Like those guys come up typically around each other when they're on base. And the guys at the bottom of the lineup, Cedric Mullins, and last night there were some Ramon Urias, runners on when he hit his home run, but those types of things at the bottom order aren't worth as much. And we're talking about like random, like sequencing stuff that you hope could balance out, but home runs are good. And I think Cody Ashley said it yesterday when we talked to him. He's like, yeah, we'd like to walk more. And we'd also, I'm sure our opponents would like us to hit fewer home runs and like it's balanced. They're just not doing it. with the consistency, I suppose, that you'd want.
Right. I mean, home run, it is in the name. It is literally the easiest way to score runs.
Yeah.
It is the best and most reliable way to score runs. So I don't want to say that teams that use the home run to an extreme are in any way faulty in their logic and their reasoning. The Orioles are built this way on purpose. It's just when they are not hitting home runs, it feels like they're not finding too many other ways to score runs. In the 31 games this year where they have not hit a homer, they're 12-19 in those games. There are 39 games in which they've hit one homer. They're 12-27 in those games, which means in the 70 games in which the Orioles have hit 1 or 0 homers, they're 24-46 for a .342 winning percentage. They're second in Major League Baseball in home runs. They're still hitting a ton of home runs, but they're 11th in on-base percentage and just 9th in batting average. So this team does not have a lot of guys right now that are getting on base consistently. We'll touch on Adley Rutschman in just a little bit because we've seen a second half swoon from him. But when they're not getting guys on and they're not hitting home runs, all of a sudden this team looks incredibly vulnerable offensively.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of an unintended consequence of the way they've identified talent, through the draft, through other means, brought along the talent that was here when they got here, where if your guys who are, if you are banking on having these dual threats, these guys that can work a walk and also punish mistakes,
yep,
you are concentrating a lot into those buckets. This isn't a team that has Mark Trumbo and Chris Davis in the middle of the lineup. So like there's a ton of value in Hyun-Soo Kim just taking pitches in front of them and like hoping something different happens. Like that was a way of going about things. Now you have, now you have Hyun-Soo Kim and Chris Davis is the same guy. You can walk in, you can hit homers.
Exactly.
And probably strike out too. So you have those in the same guy. And when it's hard to ask them for all those things. And I think when that happens, there's like, to the extent momentum's real, when things are going well, when guys are hitting the ball out, like it happens in bunches. We see that time and time again. And when things aren't going well because of the relative sameness of some of the approaches and the plans, like you find often that the types of pitchers who do well against this lineup do well against everybody, and the types of pitchers who do not.
Yeah. What would Chris Davis and Hyun-Soo Kim look like in one physical Frankenstein being? Enormous upper half.
Yeah, there'd be a lot going on there.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about guys that have that concentrated ability to draw walks and hit homers. Gunnar Henderson is that guy. He is that guy to a prototype. 13th in baseball in OBP. So he is getting on base and obviously near the top of the league in home runs. But then there's a huge drop off between the next guy on the Orioles list, and that's Ryan O'Hearn with a .344 OBP, but he doesn't have enough plate appearances to count for a batting title. So Adley Rutschman is the next guy at 61st in Major League Baseball in OBP, and Colton Cowser comes in at 68th. I think this lineup right now, you mentioned all of the injuries that they've undergone, and obviously right now you're missing Mountcastle, you're missing Mullins. Those are two guys that are not on the injured list but have missed the last several games. So to the same degree that we talk about the rotation when we say it's not fair to expect the same kind of results from this rotation while they're missing Grayson Rodriguez and Zach Eflin and Kyle Bradish, I think it's also not fair to expect the same kind of results when they're missing guys like Mullins and Mountcastle, and especially Jordan Westburg. I mean, Jordan Westburg didn't have a crazy high OBP, 317, but he was still hitting 269. That was second best on the team behind Gunnar. He just felt like the glue in this lineup. And a lot of times we saw it in Houston where he just kept hitting home runs. A lot of times when this offense was not getting anything done, he was the one that stepped up. He raised the floor of this offense. And as great as Ramon Arias has been offensively, in the absence of Jordan Westburg, having both those guys hitting well right now would give Brandon Hyde just so many more options to construct a lineup where he wouldn't have to be putting Austin Slater in center field as often as he is, or Eloy Jimenez in the lineup at DH as often as he is, or Emmanuel Rivera starting back-to-back games.
Yeah, and I think what was lost with Jordan Westburg, it's easy to say now, having not seen him, like, not having any bad at-bats stuck in your brain from like a day ago, but like there's a quality of at-bat that you came to expect, and that's really important. There's been a lot of, for the guys who have been successful in executing this plan and not, I think a lot of the Orioles, especially at the top of the lineup, you're getting a lot of like mistake hunting early, and like whether those mistakes end up in the seats or pop-ups or whiffs, whatever. There's a lot of early count aggression that you're seeing, and Jordan Westburg had some of that in him, but he also was going to take the same at bat. Often.
Yes,
he was going to stick to the plan in a really meaningful way. And you get to that point of not having that guy, not having some of the other guys you expect to be doing that, and it's easy to see why the offense can results-wise not have the outcomes that they've wanted recently.
Yeah, I mean, we were so complimentary of Jordan Westburg when he was on the field for his 2-strike approach, and a lot of that was fouling off pitches, and a lot of it was getting into a deep count where you do have 2 strikes on you, and you're still able to extend the at-bat. You just don't have too many of those guys, in part because, like, Gunnar Henderson doesn't swing and miss a whole lot. He doesn't get into deep counts in terms of strikes. Like, he'll draw a walk, but when he is at a point now in his career where he is respected so much, he doesn't get mistake pitches very often. Yeah. So he's, like you said, he's hunting those pitches early. If he sees it, he's going to swing at it because he knows he's only going to get 1, maybe 2 of those per at bat.
Yeah, and he does a really good job of not letting that one pass by.
Yes.
That's why there was that spell where he basically you couldn't miss the first inning of an Orioles game because he was probably just going to hit a home run.
Yeah.
He's getting back to that form, and I think that's going to be pretty helpful as this, stretch run comes down. You talk about 30 games. A lot of those are against teams that they should beat. Yeah. They are better than. And part of that is like your best players need to just post in those games. And like I've covered the Orioles through a lot of bad seasons. Most of that time spent in the Orioles clubhouse and the Orioles post-game stuff. Like I never heard one team like apologize for like thumping them when they were bad. Like that's what you do. You need to beat the teams you're supposed to beat. And like the players who it was always, sometimes there's a random like Randall Grichuk or Gleyber Torres, but like the guys need to beat the teams they're supposed to beat. They need to be guys. They need to go into like these places and show that they are the ones who are the best players on the best team and like let people know that. And I think there's a gear to get to for this team in that sense.
One of their best players who has not played at his best recently is Adley Rutschman. You wrote about on the BaltimoreBanner.com the other day where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months, read all of John's great work, as well as Andy Koska and Kyle Goon and Danielle Allentuck. For Adley, it's really been the tale of 2 seasons. He started out the season gangbusters, hit 16 home runs in the first couple months of the season before the break, and he's hit 2 so far in the second half. The story the first half was he's not drawing a lot of walks. It doesn't matter because he's hitting the cover off the ball and he's not missing the pitches that he's getting. Recently, he has been missing a lot of those pitches. His walk rate has been going back up, and he's back to the 60th percentile in baseball, according to StatCast, in walk percentage. But we've seen his batting average has dropped 28 points. It dropped 28 points in the month of July. It's now sitting at 262. His OPS has gone down in the month of August, even though that batting average has stayed relatively similar. He's not hitting for power, and even though the walks are coming a little bit more frequently, it's frustrating. You can blame it perhaps on the back troubles that he's had this season. He obviously had that moment where he fouled a ball off his hand, and that is a moment that you can point back to and say maybe things changed for the worse then. You could also point to the fact that he has a unique workload because he's relied upon so much to be a DH in this lineup when he's not catching because they can't miss his bat in the lineup. You could point to any number of things, but it has been a frustrating second half for Adley Rutschman.
Yeah, and when I broke it down, I can't speak to what's happened in the week or so since then, but there was a pretty clear split in what was happening when Adley Rutschman was making contact. He just wasn't hitting the ball as hard as often, and that's not something you would expect from him. I think if you go back to like 2021, that first year after the pandemic shutdown, as he was kind of figuring out what kind of like professional hitter he was going to be, there were some stretches when you would be able to say like the quality of contact wasn't ideal. He was popping the ball up a lot, kind of got in between swings and figured out which one he wanted to do, and like boom, like 2 All-Star games later, like it worked out pretty well. For whatever reason, and I'm not medically trained. I'm not a doctor. I've never.
You just play one on TV.
Yeah, no, I have no insights beyond what we know publicly about Adley Rutschman's health. Like there has to be a reason for something like that to happen. It's not something that happens to players often.
Yeah.
It's not something that happens to players who typically are consistent. I mean, other than this stretch, I don't think he had any months like below like a 7-something OPS in his career. And for him to be going on like 2 months of this happening now feels very outside the norm. There was a time when he was not walking, and I don't think that, nobody was going to give back any of the home runs so that he would walk more, but I don't know that there was a ton of, I don't know how sustainable a lot of people like who were looking at that thought that was going to be.
Yeah.
And you can't predict anything that happens beyond this. And I don't think you would have predicted like the regression to be what it is, but the reality is he's not hitting the ball as hard, and he hasn't for 2 months now. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the solution to that is.
Yeah. And you also understand why so few teams have good hitting catchers. I think there are a lot of factors go into that. I think one, it's catching the baseball, receiving the baseball is just a different skill entirely than hitting. And it's hard to find guys who have skills, have talent concentrated in those two areas specifically because they're vastly different. But also you do understand that it is such a demanding position that we've seen. I remember the story in the first half, fans were complaining that Adley wasn't catching enough. And you just have to look at how demanding that position is and look at how important he is to the lineup right now and take the big picture in mind and say, you need him at his best near the end of the season. And if you burn him out early by having him play as many games behind the plate as possible, he's not going to be productive by the time you get to the end of the season. He's going to be worn out. I know he's only 24, 25, but he's going to be a different player by the time you get to the end of the season. It's why James McCann stayed in there with a broken nose and blood dripping out of his face, because he was so intent on giving Adley Rutschman a full off game in the first half of a doubleheader so that he didn't have to catch 18 innings. It was critical to James McCann, and it's been critical to the Orioles that they keep Adley Rutschman as healthy as possible. And I think you're now starting to see him be worn out a little bit. There's been so much burden on the guy, and now we're in late August, and you wonder if finally the workload is catching up to him.
Yeah, and this has been the case for him. He has played at this level and, with this volume of, starts versus just straight days off since he was called up to the Orioles in 2022. This has been something that they've done. I don't want to say intentionally, but like, this is not an accident how they use him. I think there's a lot of benefits to that. He's really good. You don't have a lot of like switch hitting catchers who can do what he does. And that's why when you have the opportunity to take one, you do, and say thank you to the draft gods. And you also use them while you can. But they're in a weird spot now with the way the lineup is. Like, he's kind of the guy who's in there against righties, and like you try to get him a DH day against lefties, because that's when he's been producing at an even higher level. Since he kind of fell off, he's been better against lefties than righties. But that's kind of Eloy Jimenez's spot right now, is like the right-handed DH, and you're kind of in a weird spot of like, do you give Adley those days off? Do you want to have him out of the lineup? Does it make a difference getting a day off or 2 days off? It's really a unique spot for them to be in. This is somebody who I think would have admitted last year that, like, as the season went on, he also, wore down a little bit. Everyone's wearing down. I talked to a player last week when I was doing the story about Jackson Holiday gaining weight, who said he's lost 15 pounds this season, just by virtue of like, there's a physical strain, and like your body reacts to playing Major League Baseball games every day in a way that, like, I certainly don't know how it would react. I know how it reacted to covering them every day, and it's pretty poorly. It wasn't a weight.
You end the season in a much worse state, health wise. Yeah,
it wasn't a weight loss situation either. I'll tell you that much. But it's really hard to do what these guys do, and to point it out as like a flaw feels really
unfair,
silly of me. And like, it's not one. It's just like the reality of what they've chosen to do. It just manifests itself in different ways. And right now, for Adley Rutschman, whatever is causing it is manifesting itself in like him not being the guy that he has been, and I think probably wants to be.
Yeah, and you brought up in that article with Jackson Holiday, because it is fascinating to look at how the strength gain for Jackson Holiday, which he said 80% of it was the lower half.
Yeah.
That time when he was on the injured list in Norfolk, he used to get stronger. That isn't an opportunity that's really been, that anybody gets. I think of somebody like DL Hall, who was sent back down, took the opportunity to go back down to the Florida Instructional League in the middle of the 2023 season, and use that opportunity to build back up his velocity and get stronger. These guys who are playing every day don't have that opportunity. I remember a couple years ago talking to Dean Kramer in spring training, and he's like, I added as much weight as I could during the season because I'm going to lose it by the time you get to the end of the year. And strength and mass matters. And for a guy like Adley Rutschman, maybe he has lost a little bit of weight because he is being used as frequently as he has. But like you said, what is at this point, it's hard to take him out of the lineup because what does 2 or 3 days do?
Yeah.
Does that really help him get back to where he needs to be? Is that enough rest? And in the meantime, you're losing a lot of production still from his bat. Even with all the struggles that he's had in the second half, he still is an OPS plus of like 115. He's still an above average hitter, and you just don't want to lose his bat in the lineup.
Yeah, you want to keep that intact, especially now. I mean, he is a person, I think, if we're talking, Adley Rutschman was drafted as and has been like a consummate like winner and team player. Like that is the high level description of Adley Rutschman. And like you see, I'm sure there is a part of him that's like, this is what we got to do. Like I am here. Like Jordan Westburg cannot be out there. Like all these, like the entire pitching staff is hurt. Like he seems like the type of person to take on that burden for the team, even if it's at the expense of itself. And that is not something anybody's going to like shy away from acknowledging or doing.
Absolutely. The frustrating part with how the Orioles have played as of late, because they've just been around 500 really since the beginning of July, is that the AL is wide open. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. The good thing is that this is anybody's league. This is anybody's American League. This is anybody's Major League Baseball this year.
Yeah.
No team is on pace to win 100 games right now. The Dodgers have the best record in baseball. They're on a 96 win pace. Yankees are a game and a half up on the Orioles right now in the AL East. They're on a 95 win pace. Orioles are on a 93 win pace. The frustrating part is the Orioles haven't really been able to take advantage of the Yankees struggles, of the Guardians struggles in the second half, and jump out to a lead and grab that number 1 seed in the American League right now. But at the same time, all of these teams are going through struggles. And so this feels like a season where you can still have a July swoon and August swoon, and you're still right back in the middle of it. That's also the benefit of the Orioles jumping out to as strong a first half as they did, as they built themselves a little bit of cushion to get through this rough part while everybody is on the injured list. And they hope to be at the end of September. You just hope to look up and say, all right, this series against the Yankees, which is coming at the end of September, still matters. This team is still in the playoff hunt, whether it's a wild card, whether it's division. You just want to get into the dance. So to be where they are right now is both frustrating, but it's also, on the glass half full side, it is still an opportunity for this team.
It is. And that's what makes this whole season at this point tricky. Like there's 30 games left, and like they can't go fast enough because you expect this team is going to make the playoffs. And like this 2 months that we're talking about now, basically since they went last time they were in New York, when they just like scored like 15 runs off Nestor Cortez, and I think that was like, or maybe it was Luis Hill.
Yeah,
sorry. Yeah, I mean,
they had a stretch where they like crushed Zach Wheeler and Luis Hill, and somebody else, I can't remember. Where they looked like the best team in baseball by far.
Yeah, and it's been like 2 solid months since then. There's a lot of things that have happened in those 2 months. There's been multiple visits to Tommy John surgeons. There's been multiple trips to injury list for pitchers who have not gotten Tommy John. There's been lineup injuries. And we're basically at the point now where you can either choose to overlook all that and be like, and think that October is a different game. And if the Orioles are in there, they were the best team in baseball last year and got swept and spent 4 days in the playoffs. Like they could just get in and have results start turning their way this year. And like, that would mean that this stretch is just,
it's just a blip.
Yeah. It's just, it's just fodder for like,
people like us.
Yeah. It's just like, we can, if they win the World Series, it'll just be like all clips like this being like, all the haters thought we couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And like,
I think back to the Rangers, who won the World Series last year and swept the Orioles. I mean, look at how they played in the second half of the season. They had a sub 500 record in July. They went 5 games over 500 in the last 2 months of the season, and they blew the division lead in the final week of the season.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter.
Yeah, it didn't matter. And like conversely, like last year, the Rays jumped out to like a 13-0 start,
Yeah.
and everyone was sitting here being like, well, that's that. And it's like fast forward to September, and the Orioles are celebrating on the field in front of them because they clinched the playoffs, I guess, on the same day. But like the Orioles won the division, and the Rays like weren't good for however long they weren't good for, and all those wins at the beginning of the season were banked and got them into the playoffs, and then they didn't do anything in the playoffs. So all this is setting the table for the possibility of the Orioles taking advantage of this. But like, and this was the newsletter Inside the Dugout last week, like, I'm going to feel dumb if I overlook like 3.5 months of like mediocre, like inconsistent baseball, and the results of that is like a mediocre and inconsistent baseball team losing in the first round of playoffs.
Right.
Like that will feel dumb to do and to have done. And I'm still doing it anyways, and I'm not sure if that's good, but like they have a very favorable schedule coming up to set themselves up for that Yankee series. I think there's an opportunity for them to be right in that mix, and absent anyone else stepping up or like not like taking whatever playoff spot they're guaranteed to have, like you just say, like, let's see what happens.
Yeah. The Orioles are breaking Jon Meoli's brain, as he said.
Among other things.
Breaking everything in our lives. All right, let's do a quick rotation reset right now, because it's hard to keep track of all of the guys who are on the injured list and the guys who are starting games. We saw this week Trevor Rogers get demoted to AAA and then have a just awful start with AAA Norfolk. 4 1/3 innings, gave up 10 earned runs. At this point, I've said it a million times, I think the Orioles made this move with 2025 and 2026 in mind, 2 more years that he's under team control. They were really not expecting too much from them this year. I think they were expecting at least that he would eat some innings in the second half and give you a little bit of depth while all these guys are recovering on the injured list. And then maybe you move him to the bullpen for the playoffs. You still hope he can do that. But at the same time, I think you got to just expect nothing from him for the final month of the season. Is that too harsh?
I don't know what to expect at this point. I went digging through Baseball Savant this morning. I was trying to find something, it's pretty easy to tell with AAA. You could say, hey, he's working on this. And like right at the top of his like player breakdown, it was like the most pitches he threw yesterday were changeups, and like they moved a little differently. And that was interesting. And you go down the list on like, there was like breaking ball and then like his 2 fastballs, and his 2 fastballs were averaging like 88 miles an hour. And Paul and I have been, around long enough to know what it looks like when you try to live in the the high 80s as a lefty. It's not
Zach Lowther, Alexander Wells.
Yeah, it was hard to do. And when I saw that, I was like, oh man, like there's probably some kind of upside to like having him there working with Justin Ramsey, who is asked to perform miracles on a regular basis and often does. But whatever the reason for that is, like, needs to get figured out first. And like when maybe like next start, you see he's like back up into the low 90s, and like you can think, all right, now we're working with something, now we're doing X, but like that wasn't encouraging.
Yeah, not at all. And especially when you look at what his role could be when he eventually comes back up here, and if he does come back up to be a starter, maybe he is able to be, successful with the pitch mix that he has. But if you get into the playoffs, that's not the ideal profile for a reliever in the playoffs. You want your guys coming out of the bullpen and just throwing gas.
Yeah.
And that's what D.L. Hall did at the end of last year. That's what he did a little bit in the playoffs. That's not right now Trevor Rogers. So if that is his role, I don't know how effective he'll be in the bullpen unless it's in a game that is out of hand. So we'll see if he's able to contribute in the final month of the season. Other than that, though, the Orioles have Cole Irvin, they've got Corbin Burns, they've got Cade Povich, they've got Albert Suarez, and they've got Dean Kramer. So you've got your unquestioned ace in Burns, your 5th starter in Kramer, a rookie, Povich, 34-year-old who hadn't pitched in the big leagues in 7 years in Albert Suarez, and he's been awesome, and a guy you DFA'd 3 weeks ago. That is your rotation right now. It was supposed to be, at the start of the season, your unquestioned ace in Corbin Burns, guy who got Cy Young votes last year in Kyle Bradish, a 24-year-old who was a top pitching prospect about a year ago in Grayson Rodriguez, a former All-Star, John Means, and your 5th starter in Dean Kramer. That is a wildly different rotation. And same conversation that we just had with hitting. You can't expect the same kind of results from a group of guys who weren't supposed to be here than you should have gotten from the group that you started the season with.
Yeah, and we're talking about like the team that looked like the best team in baseball. Basically, you can kind of use the delineation point like that Phillies-Yankees week when Kyle Bradish ultimately went down. Like, there was a lot that changed then, but a lot of these pitchers were really like a lot better early in the season. Like Cole Irvin, the first 2 months of the season was really good. Like there were people who were like clipping out like, oh, like best pitchers with minimum X amount of pitches since like in the last year, or innings in the last year. And like Cole Irvin was on that list statistically. And for whatever reason, it's backed up. You don't expect to have to dig. And this is where I struggle. This is where I really struggle, Paul, because like you don't expect to have to dig as deep into your pitching depth as they have. And you kind of hope that your pitching depth will do what it has done. Like Albert Suarez has been like,
yeah, that's the thing, is
really, really valuable.
It's been okay.
Yeah. Like Cade Povich has been, for somebody who's learning how to pitch in the big leagues, and like there have been some bad outings, there have been some good outings. That's exactly what you're going to get.
Yeah. He's like not a top 100 prospect. Like he's a top 10 prospect in your system, but what they've gotten out of him, I think, is far greater than what you could have asked from him.
Yeah. Yeah. And you go down the line, like Dean Kramer seems to have this thing recently where he's just a lot better pitcher as the season's gone on. His splitter is like a real good pitch, which there was potential for from the moment he started throwing it, because that's why people throw splitters.
And that's why you wrote about it on BaltimoreBanner.com.
That's the place that happened. It's really, really challenging to see kind of where this has gotten. And like you look at like if anything else happens. I mean, last week's newsletter was basically like, I'll think what I think until like there's another like debilitating injury. And then Zach Eflin went on the injury list like literally an hour later. Yeah. And there's been 2 guys who haven't played, like who are their like core starters in the lineup since then. So these things are stacking up, and the rotation has been really, really impacted by it. The difference, all that said, to me is that like this team won its first 2 games trailing after 6 innings, like this weekend,
week,
in like 3 months.
Yep.
And that's has something to do with, the starting pitchers keeping it close, has something to do with quality of at bats later in games. But like, there's also something to be said for like this team's ability to keep games close.
Yes.
And whether it's the starting pitching not coming through, the kind of like soft underbelly of the bullpen being just that, like that's where this team is going to need to be better in this last month until this Yankee series, and like keep it close, because you think watching this team and that there's not as much like leverage success or production. Like they are like broadly like the same team pretty consistently in like these like late leverage situations all year. And it's just weird sequencing, but they need the opportunity to do that. You saw them have the opportunity to do that this weekend, and I think that's where it's going to come. This has nothing to do with the rotation, but like these guys just need to keep them in games, like, and not like deliver 2 runners in scoring position with 1 out to the bullpen in the 5th inning.
Yeah,
because those guys are tending to score these days, and those kind of change games. So that's where we're at.
Which is exactly why Trevor Rogers couldn't stick in this rotation.
Yes,
because he was consistently not giving you 5 innings and consistently getting himself into trouble that the bullpen some fireman would have to come out and put out the fire in the bullpen. And it's for a team that is right now desperate for any kind of starting pitching. The fact that he was not able to give them what they needed, and to the point where they had to send him down, speaks volumes as to where he is right now. I also have seen a lot of belly aching about the Orioles record in 1-run games and how it compares to last year. One of that is they don't have Felix freaking Bautista back there. And the other part of that is luck. Like it's the same token that in NFL games, turnover luck is the thing. You're scoring 1-run games is kind of luck. It kind of comes down to who's able to get a hit in the final couple innings. And it just is kind of a coin flip. So I think to read too much into that, other than, well, the Orioles don't have the best closer in baseball, would be a little bit foolhardy.
Yeah. And like, there's nothing satisfying about like watching a team lose series, lose games, excuse me, and being like, oh, just bad luck. Like, chalk it up. There's nothing less satisfying than that. It doesn't mean that it's not true, but we were talking about at the ballpark this week, how many games did this team win over the last, in the preceding year to this point? I think we're at the anniversary of Felix Bautista blowing out yesterday. Unhappy anniversary to that.
August 25th.
But they would win games, they would win at least one of those Mets games, because Brendan Hyde would use Felix Bautista in the 9th inning of a tie game.
Yep.
And then the Orioles would scrap together a run in the 10th, and then he would throw 7 pitches and get the win in the 10th. And like, that would be it. We don't know if Sir Anthony Dominguez could do that. He didn't give himself the opportunity to do so in either of those games, but those matter. And the fact that this team hasn't had the same results in 1-run games is noise, but like there is a Felix Bautista component to all this, I'm sure. And like Yennier Cano's not the guy that he was, and Danny Coulombe's not part of this bullpen. Like,
exactly.
There are a lot of differences to this bullpen, and I think it starts with the closer though.
Let's talk actually briefly, because I know I've kept you far too long and you have other commitments, but anytime I can get your thoughts on everything, I have to use as much of your time as possible. Let's talk about Felix Bautista, because was the anniversary yesterday of him going down in what eventually turned into Tommy John. But the Orioles didn't have him go for surgery immediately. Remember, he had that UCL injury on August 25th. They kept him throwing in the bullpen, and they kept hope alive that he was going to be able to pitch in the playoffs last year. And when Mike Elias did it, he basically said there's nothing to lose by doing this. And at that moment, you could tell that they were already taking 2024 off the table. He eventually fails in his ability to come back and pitch through a UCL injury, because that's very, very hard to do. I'm not a doctor, but I don't know exactly what they saw there where they believed that he could potentially pitch through a UCL injury. He gets the Tommy John surgery anyway on October 1st. But there is a world where maybe he gets that Tommy John surgery earlier, closer to the actual date of the injury, August 25th. Maybe it's a week after. Maybe it's September 1st instead of October 1st. Right now, we're seeing Felix Bautista in the bullpen at Camden Yards, in the clubhouse. He's throwing. He is, I don't know, we don't have a radar gun on this, so we don't know how hard he's throwing, but he's clearly well enough to be throwing at this point. And we have a month left in the regular season. It's been less than 12 months since his injury, but the Orioles have ruled out the possibility that he is going to come back this season, in the regular season, in the playoffs. Mike Elias could be tempted over this final month to maybe ramp him up quickly and get him going, considering all the struggles that we've seen from Sir Anthony Dominguez, from Craig Kimbrell. But at the same time, you noted that Felix Bautista did have a setback earlier this season. That extended his timeline to come back. And it's also going to be really, really hard to get him back, even if the Orioles wanted to, and they've already ruled him out, but maybe they're thinking about it. It would be incredibly hard to get him back to the point where, yes, he's throwing off the bullpen now, but to have him go on a rehab assignment and to get him back to the point where he could be pitching in the playoffs, it just doesn't seem feasible.
Yeah. I think it's unfortunate, like the timing of no injuries, well timed. It's unfortunate the timing of that injury. I felt the same way last year. I was kind of like, what are we doing here?
Yeah. For that month where they were just throwing him in the bullpen last September.
Yeah. If there is a hope that he could, we also did see, there was no injection, I don't believe. So it wasn't exactly the same as Kyle Bradish, but like,
right.
If you can get someone to, back on the mound and doing what they can for a month, even if where the ultimate outcome is going to be, and they're okay with that, which is a big component of this. Like, yeah, you try. But sitting here now, given, John Means also had some setbacks and didn't have like a full 1 year, maybe they just thought like, we are not going to, even if this happens right now, like the accepted Tommy John timeline is a year, maybe ours is longer because we want to make sure we do X, Y, and Z and right. do this. I've done stories in the past talking to guys who had Tommy John and were like, a regular off season was super valuable. So maybe they said, if we do this in early September and have him come back and ramp up for the playoffs and pitch, and then he has to like rest because what he did was really hard, and then he's getting a late start for the off season, and you're delaying 2025 and impacting that. Maybe they just view the full off season. It's challenging though. I mean, that was a moment I remember being there, and you see it happen, and you're just like, that this is like a hugely impactful thing. It proved to be hugely impactful last year. They also saw that the recovery from Tommy John not going well, or being rushed, or not fully taking, can be hugely impactful with John Means, like after the fact, but that was just as impactful on this team going out in 3 games in the playoffs anyway. So yeah, it is right there. Like, you see him walking around and you see him throwing, and you're like, man, that would be so helpful. I'm sure Brandon Hyde sees it and still is like, man, that would be so helpful. But it kind of speaks to the volatility of that spot. We're talking about somebody who wasn't even on the radar 3 years ago, and he was part of this bullpen with Dylan Tate, who has not returned to form in that 2022 bullpen that got really good. There's Jorge Lopez, who was really, really good and has not been that guy since. With Cianel Perez, who's been pretty good since then, but has not been that guy. And now you have Bautista, who was the best reliever in baseball. Yeah. And it's really challenging to not have that. And I'm sure there's a huge temptation to to do something that they know they're not going to do.
One guy who was really good last year, who I think some people forget about, is Yennier Cano. Like, I still think he can be used in high leverage situations. I think he's underrated. He still has like a 2.79 ERA. He's a ground ball artist. Like, I know he's not your ideal option at closer, and the Orioles clearly don't want to go down that path. They want to be using Sir Anthony Dominguez, it sounds like, as much as possible, but I still think Yennier Cano has been very valuable to this team. But yeah, you wonder if the Orioles had gotten that Tommy John surgery done September 1st instead of October 1st, whether he would be healthy enough right now to be pitching. And you do wonder if I just think we have to take Michael Elias at his word right now and say that it's off the table for 2024. And I think if, they're really truly, if we take them at their word and they are off the table, what is he doing out there? I think they want to have him pitching so that he's not starting again from zero in 2025, because we saw, like with Garrett Crochet, how the White Sox have had to really slow play him this year. That was a whole thing where he was being considered as a trade candidate, and he said, you have to extend me first because I have this innings limit this year. I don't want to overextend myself. If Felix Bautista took off the entire season this year, didn't pitch at all, and comes into 2025 with no work under his belt in the past 18 months, that would be a big concern. So I think they're just keeping him warm to the point where he can have a bigger workload than maybe expected in 2025. But boy, is it tough to just see him out there and not be able to use him.
Yeah. And I wonder, if he gets into games somewhere, if that's available to him, if that's something they want to do, whether it's just, so he has that feeling again. I don't know where that would fall on his, I don't know where he ended up when he had his setback, where that put him on his throwing progression, but it is a tease to have him, but there's also, there's Danny Coulomb out there playing catch too. Like,
true.
Jacob Webb's out there too. We're not talking about Felix Bautista level guys, but like, there are pitchers who are returning to the staff at some point soon. And like, they're not Felix Bautista, but they're probably going to help.
And Jordan Westberg is taking ground balls with his, just with his glove. Or he's just doing it with his offhand, basically. He's going to hope to come back. Westberg will. Hopefully this bullpen is going to get guys like Jacob Webb and Danny Coulomb back. Hopefully we get Grayson Rodriguez back at some point. And Zach Eflin, who said he's not even thinking about a rehab assignment, I think took that to mean hopefully he's going to come right back off the injured list. Although, God, your man plans and God laughs. So that's something I think the Orioles plan and God laughs is something we could also say.
Yeah. There's we're sitting here looking at a big whiteboard that's not hanging up. They have a big whiteboard, I'm sure, of who they want to be pitching in certain games. And I'm sure that they have worn out their eraser.
Yep. It's just everybody's scratched off.
Yeah. There's a lot of whiteboard dust on that pitching board.
If Brendan Hyde had any hair at the start of the season, he wouldn't have any now. All right. That just about does it for the Banner Baseball Show. At Jon Meoli is John's Twitter handle. I'm at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports. And of course, the BaltimoreBanner.com is your place to go for John's work, Danielle's work, Andy's work, and Kyle's work, where you can keep up to date on everything Orioles. Orioles have an off day today, but they're back in action tomorrow. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please give us a like, a thumbs up, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. For Jon Meoli, I'm Paul Mancano.